My name is Heldáy de la Cruz. I am originally from Mexico. Been in the U.S. for coming on 28 years. I am an undocumented queer artist. I focus a lot on illustration and community work here in Portland, Oregon. In terms of my story coming to the United States, I can't really dive into that story without my parents' story. My father crossed the border first. I think I came next, and then my mom, very different timeline. There was a period of separation in that, I think about 2 weeks of not being together. I was 2 years old. I don't remember any of it. I know that I was asleep in a car when we crossed the border. In that time, I stopped drinking milk from my bottle. A lot of changes happened when I was finally reunited with my mom. My dad crossed, I think, pretty easily. My mother's journey was a lot harsher. She was pregnant at the time, and she got into a really awful interaction with Border Patrol, some sort of agent who stepped on her back and then let her go, allowed her to cross. Eventually, when we all were back together again, we settled in Eastern Oregon, which is where I grew up. So we built our farm and built our lives in this little farming community in Eastern Oregon. The reason my family came to the U.S. is the same reason a lot of families do. Nothing really unique about it, other than chasing some form of an American dream, looking for opportunities, growing up in poverty in Mexico, and realizing it was a space that kind of cycles and you stay in, and they wanted something different and better. I believe the idea was that my dad would cross, work here, and send money, as a lot of immigrants do. But my mother was not interested in being left alone in Mexico with 2 kids and another one on the way. The reality of being undocumented for me became, I knew that since I was a kid, so probably age 5 or so. I was told that we were undocumented. I knew it at age 5 or so, knew not to talk about it, knew not to tell anybody about it. And honestly, things felt pretty normal for the most part. It only really hits you when you become a teenager and you start to run into obstacles. So I tried to get my my driving permit, and the laws in Oregon had just changed, I think the year before, requiring a social security number to drive. So I was not able to get my driver's license. That was the first obstacle. Next came applying for college or university after high school. We're not able to qualify for any sort of federal aid. That was a hard time for me as an 18-year-old, watching all of my friends leave, and once again lying or fabricating that I am deciding to do this because I want to, which is stay home and go to the community college there, which was not true. You know, I would have loved to have an experience like my friends were having, but it just wasn't possible for me. Thankfully, I was able to partake in the DACA program once it was introduced. And that changed a lot of things for me. The idea of living between 2 cultures is something that I'm still understanding, and also something that has just been my entire life. I identify deeply with a lot of the Chicanos in the U.S. that, you know, when they're home, their parents are speaking Spanish, the culture is there, but then they're in an American school and they're into American things. There is a push and pull of these two worlds, and of not being enough of one or the other. And for a long time, that felt really hard because you have to push for one over the other. I think as a kid, I didn't want to be Mexicano, I didn't want to be brown, I didn't want to be othered. And you try to shed that as much as you can and assimilate and fit in. I don't think that way anymore, thankfully. And so it's been a reintroduction for me as an adult to tune back into my upbringing and my culture. The decision to tune into the area of like politicizing my identities was a conscious decision. One that was hard to do because as an undocumented person, you grow up in fear and insecurity, and you know that any little thing you do can cause so much harm. It could be detainment, it could be deportation, it could be putting your family in danger, and so it was not an easy decision for me to make to be more open about it or public about my undocumented status, but it is something that I felt was necessary to start to shift the conversation. And I made the decision because I felt a lot of support from my community, from the people that are directly close to me that have been supportive and can understand it to a degree. DACA acted as sort of a shield, something that allows me to legally be in the US, to have a legal presence. It's temporary, but it gives you this sort of protection from deportation. It wasn't just me, it was like a whole group of undocumented people that came out of the shadows in this way, to say, we're here, we've always been here, and now we're speaking up. It was this huge moment of feeling empowered. I have felt and I have seen the conversations shift. I have seen DACA become a regular conversation, a national conversation, whereas before it was under the radar for years. It is also unfortunate to know that my identities are tied to politics in this way because it puts me in a position where things can be changed by political motivation or lawmakers, and they're playing with our lives. It is something that affects us deeply when changes happen. When the current administration started the process of ending the DACA program in 2017, that is when we strongly came out to talk about our experiences and our stories, to gain more public traction behind us and support. In terms of visibility and what it means now, there is a community of people that are a part of that have made that decision, that are artists, that are queer as well. It tends to be that these are the folks that end up leading the movements, right? Folks that have these like levels of oppression on them. And so for me, meeting some of these people and creating this community, first on the internet and then in person, and having these friendships with folks that share all of these identities with me, and their stories are different, but they're so similar, I think pushes us further into sort of creating a united front around our stories. Ultimately, whatever happens with the policies around it all, that'll happen, but the really beautiful part of it is that we've built this community around it, and I don't know how that would have happened without any of us being open about our status. I tend to think of my queer identity and my undocumented identity as intertwining and also very separate. I feel like they orbit really close to me and really far away from me, depending on where I'm at in my life or what sort of work I'm doing. Coming out as a gay man did not feel too different than coming out to people as an undocumented person. The commonality here is that there's secrets. There is an internal dialogue that's happening that's letting you know there's this thing about you that people can't know because of the fear of being pushed away or disowned. And of course, they're different. I think undocumentedness puts more people at risk, like your family. The stakes are, deportation, being put back in a place that you don't really know that well, and being banned from the U.S. In terms of queerness, I think that I had to create a community for myself, and that was not as difficult. Especially living in a bigger city, leaving a small town, coming to a bigger city and setting the intention of meeting more queer folks, creating a community for myself to feel that safety and to create that safety for others. I think the biggest thing is that with both of them, you can't just say it once and then expect everyone to know. It's so internal that people can meet you and not know that. And so it's a constant coming out, I guess, of these identities that I've had to get used to. In my art, in my craft, I draw from the things I know. I think for a long time, I wanted not to. I wanted to avoid that. I would have preferred to draw other things or make art about other things that, to me, at this point, don't feel relevant anymore. To me, it's an affirmation that I'm in a place of comfort and security and empowerment of my identities, that I want to own them and I want to talk about them openly. I do this in my artwork. I talk about the undocumented narrative. I interview people. I draw people that have these experiences as well. And in queerness as well. What has been really fruitful for me in tuning into these identities for my artwork is that I only have more questions every time, and it pushes me to ask broader questions or search for broader themes around these identities. My training is in graphic design. That is what I went to school for and what I do for work. And so for me, it feels important to use those skills to put out work that has very blunt statements or often political statements. One I created recently that just is a typeface I made, and it just says, ICE is a terrorist organization. And I knew there was going to be a whole lot of pushback on that on the internet, as there always is. But it also felt important for me to make that statement, to talk about that, to open up the conversation around why that sounds so harsh to people, why we need to talk about the fact that ICE has not been around that long, why it was created, and how they've strayed so far from the intention of what they were supposed to be. And what they do now is terrorize undocumented communities and separate families. I have been able to put my artwork out into the world in a way that I have more control over, and that is through being a part of a collective called UndocuPDX that I started in 2017. The group started as We the Dreamers, changed to Power the Dreamers, and now is UndocuPDX. And that is because we shed the word dreamer. The three of us that run the collective really hate the word dreamer. It feels like an imposition of politics onto our identity. The work there is about creating events that center our narrative as undocumented people and highlight other undocumented people. Through the group, we've created zines. One of them was called Esto es para ti, for undocumented people by undocumented people, a collection of poetry, art, writings. We've put on many art shows that are always fundraisers for organizations that we care about, like Pueblo Unido, which is a partner of ours. The work feels like it is a way to draw people in, and then we try to hold on to them and try not to let them leave and ask them to radicalize themselves a little harder, to think beyond DACA, to consider the full undocumented community. Ultimately is what we're all doing is tuning into these like very real human emotions and experiences, like loss, like love, like grief, like breakups and falling in love and babies and all of the things that we all experience. However, what are some of those hardships and difficulties that come out of these like shared human experiences when you look at them through a lens of these identities? I hope the idea comes across in my work for people to just continue to challenge their own, not values, but beliefs, I suppose, and push further this feeling of showing up for people, of showing up for community. That's the biggest thing I've learned in the last 4 years of this administration and the hardships it causes, is that I can't depend on politics and I can't depend on the government. I don't believe that politicians will save us. I have only ever felt held by my community, and so that community has only grown over time through some of this work. And so that is the work I'll continue to do, is building that community and bringing people into it. Yeah.